Hello, team. It's time for the Daily Detangler. I get a kick out of that music. I actually like listening to it. My kids think it's funny too, and they have no idea about the show In Search of. And I'm in search of a detangled catalyst. Is that a thing? Is it possible that catalyst gets tangled? Absolutely. And I'm gonna walk through some of that here, and I appreciate him asking for my thoughts around what are some tangles that he might be experiencing and sharing as he's making toast. So I'm going to share about my observations there and kind of repeat back what I'm hearing and then what I'm seeing, right? The order has come in from Catalyst, ding ding. He's asking for detangling services, and I'm gonna share what I'm seeing, not with the goal of necessarily fixing him, right? That's not the goal here. The goal is to see if I can relate and then see what happens after that. So maybe detangling catalyst is not necessarily going to happen, but we'll see. But maybe it's understanding where you're coming from and where catalyst is coming from that I can share. So, he asked, "Hey, what tangles do you see in my video?" And it's some awesome artwork here. He's talking about, let me talk about my toast and let me get out of my head what I think. And here's me, Catalyst, and I'm sad. He's sad, Catalyst, and we all get sad, don't we? And I appreciate him sharing that because it's something that I can certainly relate to. And I've often wondered how, I know he's human, but it's one of those things where I'm in awe of his ability to stay positive and stay focused and prioritize and think through, as he shared in the video that he put together, the flows, and have these flows in mind. So I can definitely relate to him in the feeling, but and I appreciate him sharing that, this idea that it can be a little bit like, am I stuck? Am I tangled? And, what do I do about that with these situations? And I really like what he said in the idea of being brilliant every day, is this idea that, and that's that video of the iceberg, and in the Being Brilliant Every Day video, Dr. Alan Watkins is talking about the impact of physiology and our inputs that turn that inputs come in, and it turns into energy and motion, which is really emotion. Emotion is energy and motion. So the emotions and understanding those and embracing those emotions is great, and calling them out and naming them is great, but it can feel a little bit queasy, right? Like I don't know about you, but it's like want to stay positive, want to keep going, and at the same time, some things are not quite right, and something's out there. We just have to figure out what it is. It's like this combination of hey, we're something's not quite right in the universe, but at the same time it's a little bit X-Files. We know something's out there, and we just have to figure out how to give it an identity, and that can create some feelings, especially when we have people's careers at stake and people's livelihoods, and what they're passionate about, and the commitments, and just a lot, right? It's a lot of stuff to think about, and it can create some toast like this, and cave drawings, and these cave drawings are cool. You look at them now and it's like, oh, okay, well, what is that? So let me play the 2 minutes here that really stood out to me with regard to Catalyst sharing his toast and his cave painting, right? He's talking about the sales objectives, the idea of how those sales objectives can help provide a structure. How do we blend strategy and tactics? And he talked about this idea of the journey for Allen Systems, and how he learned to evolve the sales objectives into something that resonates, and the people that have skin in the game seems to resonate the most. And those that don't have the skin in the game, it doesn't necessarily resonate as much. But he built the whole meta group approach on that, right? And he had huge increases. He got more and more, broader scope and broader remit. And that approach and what he built there helped people, be successful. And he knows, and he shared in the when he was whiteboarding this out, that by doing these types of things, those situations create assets that allow people to take action, right? And taking action is the key. So after he was going through all this and sharing these slides, he said the following.
So these are things that are on my mind. I'd love thoughts on how we go about getting to the shared understanding. What do I need to do? How do I organize or create the logical foundation of sales objectives? How do I provide the knowledge transfer? How do we build the lab in order to unpack it so that we're not just doing things and not knowing why we're doing it? How do I develop the chemistry so that we reduce the issue of trying to take orders from me, instead of like, hey man, let me help you figure this out. Let's figure it out together. And let's pay these things off. Let's do that. What resistance are we running into? What's the VUCA going on? How do we confront this? This is what's on my mind this morning, and this is my whiteboard. Thanks.
So that's a lot. And the thing that's cool about it is the innovate versus operate kind of comes to mind in this innovate space. Look what he's talking about. The idea of working together and building out these things together and creating the right environment, building the lab, having chemistry, overcoming resistance. These are all environmental factors that allow people to, contribute and add, just synergy from each other, in an additive way. And I juxtapose that kind of innovation challenge with the operate challenge, which, I've been personally stuck in that hell the last 2 days. And it's like, hey, that icon needs to move to the left. And it's just so completely different. I don't even want to taint this video with how operational that stuff is that I'm dealing with. But it's really cool to see the challenge is with innovation, is where I'm giving this a bit of an identity. And yeah, it can be challenging, and there can be some tangles. So what are those, right? And so I captured, and I'm repeating back, and I'm trying to make sure I relate to and share what I'm, and repeat back what Catalyst is sharing, right? Like VUCA is creating these barriers to knowledge transfer between and among us. Creating barriers to, or challenges into, how do we build the lab, and how do we create this chemistry as a team and lay the foundation and create the foundation. And this idea of resistance, what is it? Is it about overcoming resistance or leaning into these things, right? How do we lean into our challenges with knowledge transfer, leaning into the fact that we can create any lab we want, or leaning into the idea that we have a great team with a lot of smart people that can really do and become the world's expert on things, right? And we have the ability to create our own foundation that's completely opposite and counter to the foundations that everybody else is laying in a go-to-market world. And we have the opportunity to learn by doing and embracing change every day that helps us overcome resistance. So, and then he, at the end of that video, he said, well, how do I provide the knowledge transfer? How do we build the lab? How do I develop the chemistry? How do I take this idea of taking orders on me, right? And these are, I think, natural tangles or challenges or questions that come up in the context of, trying to innovate in a VUCA environment. So to me, it's like, I can really relate to that. And I think others on the team can relate to these things. And, is there just one silver bullet or one magic answer? The answer to that is no. But I think what is repeatable to me is this idea that I get tangled in the same types of things. There's patterns of tangles that I see playing out, and I can relate to those, and I'm going to share those. And, I think I see those with other people too. And just sharing what that means in an innovation space, responding to VUCA environment, creating an environment where everybody can innovate. What does that look like? So I have these kind of 5 tangles that jump out to me, and I've used these with myself and to detangle myself and to share what was on my mind. And I have the 5 types, and each of these has their own little icon, their own little visual. I have, each knot is a bit different here for 5 tangles. I'm pretty proud of that artwork. But it's that, I'll lay these out, and then what I'll do is, let me since I just played the tape on what Catalyst shared, let me use these 5 common tangles per his request and see how they map. And can I map these tangles to what he shared in his whiteboard video? So there's a tangle caused by volatility, which is, where do we focus, and what are we going to focus on? And then there's this idea of uncertainty, and what's the priority that we need to double down on, or what's the priority now or today or long-term, short-term, and these can create tangles. What's the most important area to make progress in? Where do we need to make progress? How do we do that in the face of complexity, when complexity is creating perceived barriers to traditional progress? How do we carve out what progress looks like in a new space? And then from an ambiguity perspective, ambiguity can naturally put people on their back foot and make him a little bit unsure. And so that lack of confidence can show up in a lot of different ways, mostly related to, how do we do this? Are we stuck? Are we not stuck? How do we move forward? What does that look like? What am I doing wrong is where it can turn into. And then from a traditional perspective and kind of a way things have done, there's this idea of the approach we take and when we usually do it. And maybe status quo isn't necessarily what maybe it's what's worked could even be part of this. I think a lot of what Catalyst brings up is one of these tangles where it's not necessarily the status quo, but the way in which he's worked in the past, and the way in which he's worked in the past has actually worked. So what's worked in the past, when he usually does it, he can make it happen, but it's just how do you scale that to others, right? And then when he scales it to others, they bring up this idea of what the status quo could be like. When I usually do this is what happens, so I'm gonna stick with it. So these are the 5 tangles just kind of laid out. On the focus tangle, it's the why now, and why are we focusing on, for example, 5 sales objectives, and why there's this whiteboard where he's sharing his toast. Why is that something I need to focus on so much, right? That's an example of a tangle that I can have with regard to focusing on that domain of tangles in general. And you would think that it would be natural for me to be focused on tangles all the time, but I have a lot of things going on that he's asked for tangle help, so that I need to get focused there and overcome those tangles. And so VUCA can cause these, primarily a lack of focus, a lack of prioritization, progress, confidence, not sure, what approach to take. And also VUCA can create a convergence of these things. And that's one of the things that I see here in what Catalyst is sharing is there's a convergence of some of these things. So what I did was, when I mapped it out, I wanted to put myself in his shoes, right? So instead of saying, well, here's your tangle, this is definitely what it is, and this is definitely what you need to do, and go to take 2 of these anti-tangle pills and call me in the morning. I didn't want to do that. I don't want to just declare what these are, but I thought, if I laid out these 5 and I go through each of his areas of concern that he shared, I can see what I think is a primary tangle. And then, he can respond back and see if that works for him or not. Right. So for example, under knowledge transfer, that's a big area of concern, is this idea of knowledge transfer. But what popped into my mind is, what does he mean by that? What is the prioritization of knowledge transfer? Why prioritize that? What does that mean? And so what I said was, well, if I were him and I was walking in my shoes, trying to empathize with that, it might be things like, hey, we all agree knowledge transfer between and among us is important. But Detangler keeps bringing up this idea of time, and I see time differently. And also, when it comes to knowledge transfer, there's this idea of how do we build off each other? Like what to transfer. That's a shorthand. I don't know if you would say it that way, but what knowledge are we creating? What are we improving on? What's the environment that Catalyst can create to foster that transfer? Everybody's different, and yet we're the same. We see these patterns. How do we create an environment where we can do that? And what can I do as Catalyst to call out the priorities and run some weekly themes? And then there's this idea of what's everybody's responsibility to following those priorities, right? If I'm Catalyst, I can set the priorities, but people need to follow, have to choose to follow those or not. And then we have an asynchronous environment, right? So asynchronously, how do we prioritize? What does that look like? And then, these are things that could create challenges to knowledge transfer. And do I have an answer as Catalyst? Probably not. If he could wave his magic wand, he would. And then as Detangler, do I have an answer to that? Probably not. But I can relate to, what do you do there? And there's some uncertainty that relates to me, and this idea that me personally, I've had struggles prioritizing around what to do. And this idea of what do I build and build on top of, and prioritize my day, my week, my month, or whatever, I can relate to that. And so that seems to be a relatable tangle that I have in my own background. So I'd love to hear, what Catalyst thinks about that. Is the idea of knowledge transfer and prioritization, what to do, does that relate? Then the next one is, building the lab. And this is an interesting one to me because the lab environment, again, back to the environmental conditions that I think Catalyst is trying to lay. But why is a lab important? Why a lab environment versus command and control? What does the lab focus on, and where do we apply our resources? These might be questions that Catalyst has, or he works through. I don't know. You'd have to confirm that, but I've heard him talk about some of these things, like what about these situations? How does our lab handle different situations? How do we move faster with more discipline? How do we do the tedious work and lean into that in our lab environment? What does it mean to help each other? What does it mean to do with the team? And how do we get that math, that synergy that happens when people are working together? And to do that, we need to help them see why. And that when you see why, we can help people focus. So, the building the lab one is why the lab, and that might be a tangle there that, how do we make that more of something for him to see, help people see why that's important and why investing that time. So I'd love, I'm just trying to, again, relate to and put myself in Catalyst shoes and, have empathy for, these are tough questions that don't necessarily have a single answer and a silver bullet, but I think I can relate to those, and I'm curious about them as well. And I can see the importance of the team to help. So, what tangles do I have personally about building a lab and, focusing? What are my own focus tangles to help? That's what that makes me think about. If that, works for Catalyst, that's be interesting to hear. And then there's, the chemistry. Are we blending superpowers? So if I'm Catalyst, I would ask, and he shared this in an email, he thinks about things like how are we leaning into our superpowers? Is he creating the right environment to embrace the experience? Are we having fun, and how do we make it fun, right? How do we show up on calls with each other, and how do we bring out the best in each other and create that positive vibe, and take things light at the same time we're disciplined, and we're doing things in bite-sized chunks, and yet we're also thorough, right? Things like that. And then he's talked about, how do we document based on the situations we've all encountered, and the more shared experiences that we've all encountered, the more chemistry we can have. For example, the stuck in the mud thing, right? So, the challenge with that is to me, it's about the challenge of the progress being made. What does progress look like? Do we realize we're making progress? Do I personally, as detangler, know we're making progress? If I'm catalyst, I'm thinking about, am I calling out the progress that's being made to inject that positive energy into chemistry? And are people seeing that progress, right? They might not even see where they're making progress. And I'll just share that was a tangle that I shared on my weekly last week. Was I'm not sure if I'm making progress, and I needed him to say I needed to hear him say what he's seen as far as my own evolution, and that helps me get untangled personally and figure out what my progress looks like. That helps me get untangled. So that can be caused by complexity. There's so much going on, and I think one of the superpowers that Catalyst has is this idea of helping everybody do their thing, and that creates a chemistry. But at the same time, it can create a tangle around what's progress being made. And so that's how I kind of see that one. Again, I'd love your feedback. The next one is this: create the logical foundation, for especially the five sales objectives. And when I think about the 5 sales objectives, this is a big call out to me around the methodology and the approaches that people have, right? So if I'm catalyst and I'm laying a 5 sales objectives, foundation, it's a completely different way. Yet people can get tangled and think that it's the same approach that to 5 sales objectives that I've always used. Those look familiar, and we say no, that's not the same thing, and that can create a tangle. And also, I think when we talk about laying a foundation, we actually are laying a foundation, and we don't have a lot of words to explain it. We're laying a foundation in something that's so new and unique that we're literally building. I like the Apollo mission and the mission to space. We're trying to figure out the math. The things with this is, the challenge with this is on a logical foundation where we're tackling things like new principles, or what we're anchoring to, or what ideas we move forward, or how do people embrace this new foundation of we're going to go to the moon. It can really, to me, hit the approach tangle, because it scratches the itch, and people want to feel like they're getting the status reports and the project plans and perhaps the things that we've always done to reconcile the approach that we're taking, right? So we want to take our same approach to a new problem, and that's the definition of insanity. So I think that the thing about Catalyst is this new foundation. It can't be like anything that exists. So that creates a lot of his own, to me, his own approach tangles. Like, what else can he do? I mean, he's sharing on this past video that I'm breaking down, he's sharing, well, maybe people need to see the historical view of where these things came from. Maybe that will help. And that will help detangle somebody to lean into more of the 5 sales objectives. And because, to me, when he outlines that and he says, hey, this is where these all came from, that can give us confidence on to take action, and makes it more like, okay. But it also, he's sharing his story that this approach works, right? It works, and it's worked in the past. So we can have more of an uptake perhaps in actually exploring it. It's not just like he just came up with it overnight. It has a historical view where this approach has worked over time, and over time has driven results. So that can put kind of the status quo on the defense. People are like, maybe my old approach to sales methodology doesn't work. So that goes straight at how they actually do think about sales. which is a kind of an approach tangle to me. So I'd like to see if that resonates. And then the last tangle is a confidence tangle. I don't think Catalyst has any short confidence here. I think for me, it's when you look at overcoming resistance, for me personally, Catalyst is probably thinking about how do we tap into everybody. He's thinking about energy and motion. There's this idea of stinking thinking as a personal story they tell themselves. What do we do when people are leaning into or digging their heels in on resistance, and are we leaning into that? And that's part of human nature. So how do we lean into these things, and how do we make this idea of a new reality, this customer-centric experience, become the focal point, where and maybe it can put people on the spot, maybe it can make people feel like they're put out, or maybe it can make people feel like perhaps they don't have the right skills. And as Catalyst, he's probably seeing that happening, and doesn't necessarily like that happening, but at the same time realizes that the environment that he's creating to embrace the resistance, it's better to do that on our team than it is in front of customers. So a lot of, to me, what tangles come up for me personally as detangler is around how to do stuff. I don't know exactly how to do it, which affects the confidence angle. I don't see that a lot with with Catalyst on him lacking confidence. I think his how is very different. And also we're not talking about how a lot of times. So that can create some ambiguity that leads to resistance. So I think he probably recognizes that. So that's my my thoughts on the tangles. When I bring these up, the biggest tangles I'm seeing are, how does he make progress, and then this focus and priority. So these three right here are kind of the idea of what are we focusing on, how do we prioritize it, and how do we make progress. So I think that's part of the challenge that he has. And then the biggest one that I feel like he's saying, especially with the idea of how do we actually build this out, is what's the approach to doing that. That's what I take away as my biggest tangle. So my tangle around what he shared was like, what is that? So I'm kind of over here as my tangles. And then I think his is, are we making progress? Is he doing everything he can to prioritize? Is he helping people focus? And, he's trying different approaches. And does that work? And does that work to help alleviate? For example, he shared the historical view. So by sharing the historical view, does that help people kind of see what they need to see? And, is that working? Right? Is he making progress on helping people see? Is he making progress on helping people see the priorities and overcome the priority tangles? And then is he helping people focus on the right things and overcome the tangles related to, why we need to focus there? So I think that's why he's a lot of focused on the why and the what. And again, I think it's for him to decide how this resonates, but this is what I'm seeing in that is, what else can he do to help us, lean into what and why? What else can he do? And then, what else can he do to help us stay focused and prioritize these things? And then, what can he do to help us call out where things are working? And he's doing that. He's a broken record on, we should do software AG, we should unpack SES, we should unpack Towson, we should unpack, the sales objectives and use those, right? Those types of things as ways for us to see where progress comes from. So I think those are the biggest three tangles that I see in what he shared. And then I shared my two. So that's me, again, not trying to diagnose, it's just I wanted to share what I saw with regard to his video, and then relate him back to the tangles that have been working on, and I appreciate the opportunity to share. And I'm just going to put these out there and see what happens. I love feedback on it. All right. Take care.